Joining me a short while ago, though, was Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew Clennell, thank you so much for joining me. How serious is this new Otis group?
Well, I think it is quite serious, Andrew. I think it's a real concern for Anthony Albanese. I mean, he's essentially got a bloke who's supposed to be a mate of his, Joel Fitzgibbon, setting up this new factional group which kind of wants him to go harder on an issue of policy, that being coal. So, in a sense, the group is critical of Albanese, and there's a suggestion of emails critical of parliamentary question time tactics. And this is the last thing Anthony Albanese needs when he's been able to focus on division on the other side of politics. So, they met first not at the Otis restaurant where they suggested they're going to meet from now on, but at Kokomo's in Civic in Canberra. And there, Joel Fitzgibbon invited a number of people and then stood up and said, we need to put together a group to push harder on coal. And it was only some in the right faction. It wasn't some of the more prominent people in that faction like Jim Chalmers and Tony Burke. They weren't invited because they're closer to Albanese. So you can see why Albanese would be furious about this. He called in Joel Fitzgibbon. His people are saying he's just disappointed, but I've heard many reports that he's quite angry. And you can see why, because the one thing they need to do is stay unified, particularly when the other mob had been giving them a free kick in that department.
Now, you mentioned coal, but what specifically is this group talking about that it wants from the Labor leader?
Well, I think it just wants more help for the coal industry. I think it wants the sort of things that Matt Canavan and Barnaby Joyce are talking about, and not statements from Albanese, for example, where he says, I don't think there should be another coal-fired power station in Australia. That's what they don't want. They don't want a move to the left or a hardening on climate change policy. They want a situation where the coal industry is backed in. They want to lurch to the right from the Labor leader. And just to give you an example, one Labor MP said to me of the reason for setting up the group, do you think people in Capricornia are running around saying, are we going to do something about climate change? As if to say, this suggestion that climate change is the only issue is rubbish. In Queensland, it's about jobs and coal and how much that export is worth to the economy. Now, Capricornia, traditionally known as a marginal seat, although Michelle Landry has increased her margin there, I think, for the LNP. But I think that is the seat, of course, where the Collinsville power station is proposed, where the federal government's announced a feasibility study. So the point being made by that MP is clearly we need to be focused on that, less so on Greens-type policies.
Yeah, but Andrew, of course, what this means is that they're shaping up for a clash with those Labor members who either have almost a religious connection to this global warming issue, they really share the panic there, plus, of course, those Labor members in inner urban seats that fear a challenge from the Greens. That's a problem, isn't it, that Albanese can't give in to them?
Or indeed just from their constituents generally. So it really is it's almost like you need an inner city party and an outer suburbs and regions party instead of the Labor and Liberal parties, with the way this issue in particular and other issues are going at times. And, you know, you see the same divides on the other side between the moderate Liberals in inner city seats and the Nationals in the regions or outer suburban MPs. It's the same sort of clash on the same issue within parties.
Well, that is spot on. I mean, you joke about it, you know, rural versus inner urban, but I think you're absolutely correct. The same kind of thing is happening on the other side of the divide of politics, and particularly, of course, with the Nationals. We now have a group, a ginger group, a sort of rebel group, a group that doesn't like the leadership of Deputy Prime Minister McCormack, demanding a new coal-fired power station. Where is that revolt going?
Well, even if McCormack stays in the job, and many doubt he will, there's no doubt they'll be pushing ahead to do something on that coal-fired power front. They'd have to for him to survive, so to keep the Nats with them. So I actually think, even though it's being talked about as a bit of a policy change, if you went to Joyce or even Littleproud, I don't think there'd be much policy change. I think McCormack's going to stick out there for the coal jobs. It's just they see him as an ineffective leader and unable to sell. And I guess Joyce is hell-bent on getting him out. That's the other thing. But, I mean, if he was a stronger leader, he wouldn't be in the trouble he's in. But I think that side of the argument's always going to win with the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, because they're much more likely to throw the toys out of the cot and just quit, as evidenced by Lou O'Brien quitting the Nationals party room, than the moderate Liberals. The moderate Liberals will jump up and down a bit, but they won't go to such extreme action. And when you have a two-seat majority, you can't afford to have people leaving the government or party rooms.
And finally, the message from the rebels on both sides of politics is the same. We're going too far on global warming. Now, we've got about 20 Labor MPs in this ginger group, this Otis group. We've got, we don't know, half a dozen maybe nationals rebelling on coal as well. But beyond them, how widespread do you think that sentiment is among MPs, that this whole global warming thing has gone too far, it needs to be wound back?
Well, it's difficult to quantify. I think it's, a significant amount on both sides, frankly. There are a significant amount of MPs on both sides of the argument. I also think that ginger group, the Labor one, Otis, would be more like 10 than 20, because 20 were invited to the restaurant. Not all of them attended, and some of them came and didn't realise what the agenda was. But 10's a solid enough number in that caucus. They've only got 68 lower house seats. And yes, it's 6 hardcore Nats, but you throw in a few Libs there as well on the right wing. Versus probably about 8 to 10 left-wing Liberals who want action in the other direction. So, I mean, it perfectly explains all this division we've seen in the first 2 sitting weeks, why Scott Morrison is going for what his supporters call the sensible centre. He's doing things about emissions, but he's protecting jobs as well. And not only does that resonate in terms of the community, but also the MPs as well. Trouble is, sensible centre, you cop criticism from both sides. But I think the events have shown that he just needs to ride that out. If he goes too far one way or the other, there's just too much blowback, especially when you've only got a 2-seat margin.
Andrew Clennell, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.